Die Kommission für Verstöße der Psychiatrie gegen Menschenrechte Deutschland, kurz KVPM, ruft dazu auf, sich am Freitag, den 1. Dezember, ihrer Protestveranstaltung gegen Europas größten Psychiatriekongress in diesem Jahr in Berlin anzuschließen.
Anlass ist der europaweit größte Psychiatriekongress der Deutschen Gesellschaft für Psychiatrie, der zeitgleich in Berlin stattfindet, bei dem es um Elektroschocks, Zwang und Psychopharmaka geht. Dieser Psychiatriekongress wird von Pharmafirmen mit über 750.000 € gesponsert und zudem von einer Münchner Firma unterstützt, die europaweit Elektroschockgeräte verkauft. Das hat nichts mit einem unabhängigen medizinischen Kongress zu tun. Trotzdem erhalten Kongressbesucher für ihre Teilnahme medizinische Zertifizierungspunkte der zuständigen Ärztekammer. In Deutschland werden rund 5.700 Menschen pro Jahr E-Schock in der Psychiatrie unterzogen. Die Dunkelziffer ist höher. Es gibt kein gesetzliches Verbot von E-Schocks bei Schwangeren, Senioren oder Kindern.
Die KVPM protestiert unter anderem dagegen, dass Psychiater bei diesem Kongress wieder die Behandlung von Patienten mit Elektroschocks befürworten, sowie eine Behandlung mit schweren Psychopharmaka und Zwangsbehandlungen. Kritisiert wird außerdem die Stigmatisierung von Kindern mit unwissenschaftlichen psychiatrischen Diagnosen. Laut Aussagen des Sprechers der KVPM Deutschland, Bernd Trepping, werden neue Leitlinien der Weltgesundheitsorganisation von den Kongressorganisatoren ignoriert. Diese neuen Leitlinien würden sich strikt gegen Zwang und Gewalt im psychiatrischen System richten. Bernd Trepping wörtlich:
Uns liegen Erkenntnisse vor, dass in Deutschland sogar Kinder im Alter von 12 Jahren Elektroschocks ausgesetzt werden. Die meisten Menschen denken, diese Behandlung sei vor langer Zeit abgeschafft worden. Doch die Psychiatrie wirbt für diese Methode. Lautstarker Protest ist deshalb dringend geboten.
Weltweit seien 1,4 Millionen Menschen pro Jahr der zerstörerischen Elektroschockpraxis ausgesetzt, heißt es in einer Mitteilung der Kommission. Mitglieder, Betroffene und Aktivisten versammeln sich um 13 Uhr neben dem DB Tower auf dem Potsdamer Platz in Berlin und marschieren über die Tiergartenstraße durch die Innenstadt zur S-Bahn-Station Savignyplatz. Von dort geht es mit der Bahn zur Messe. Vor dem Haupteingang CityCube spricht unter anderem eine frühere Assistentin von Dr. Boutros Boutros-Ghali, dem ehemaligen Generalsekretär der Vereinten Nationen, auf einer Bühne der KVPM. Eine junge Sängerin sorgt für eine positive Stimmung. Die KVPM Deutschland zeigt während des dreitägigen Kongresses täglich von 8 bis 21 Uhr ihre internationale Wanderausstellung Psychiatrie, Tod statt Hilfe in einem Zelt direkt vor dem Haupteingang vor dem CityCube am Messedamm Berlin. Inklusive Journalisten und Aussteller werden 10.000 Teilnehmer zum Psychiatriekongress erwartet. Mitglieder der KVPM werden wie schon vergangenes Jahr 3,5 Tage lang versuchen, jeden der Teilnehmer persönlich durch ihre Ausstellung zu führen. Der Eintritt ist wie immer kostenlos. Im Anschluss strahlen wir den Dokumentarfilm Therapie oder Folter, die Fakten über Elektroschock aus.
I was a nurse for over 22 years in the field of psychiatry.
The supervisor said, "Oh, you're on the ECT rotation next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?"
The idea is that the shock will subdue the unwanted emotions. In fact, all it ended up with was brain damage.
I underwent electroshock therapy from the ages of 14 to 16.
And I can remember saying, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?"
If this is a hospital, why are you locking the doors?
This is about making money at the expense of vulnerable people in our society.
It's one of the most barbaric treatments that the world has ever known.
I don't remember anything anymore. It's too late. If I ask you what is ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, what do you say?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I have no clue.
I don't know.
I don't know the acronym, but I'm assuming you're talking about like electroshock therapy.
I think I've seen it in the movies. It's a pretty bad reputation, and it's generally frowned upon nowadays.
Outdated. I don't think they really use that anymore.
It is considered an antiquated technique.
Barbaric.
Brutal.
Some say it was extremely traumatizing.
Did you know they're still doing electroshock?
I really did not know that this was actually still happening.
Oh, they're still doing it? Why?
I can't believe that it's still allowed.
I thought it was against the law.
Von all den unmenschlichen Praktiken der Psychiatrie ist die Elektrokrampftherapie eine der grausamsten und barbarischsten.
People often ask, what is electroshock? And what it is electrocution. That's all it is. They don't call it electrocution. They call it electroconvulsive therapy because it has a magic three-letter acronym, ECT. And the one thing it isn't is therapy.
ECT involves applying electrodes to a patient's scalp and then passing an electrical current through the skull and the brain tissue in order to induce a seizure.
Psychiater jagen bis zu 460 Volt pure Elektrizität durch den Schädel, um vorsätzlich einen Krampfanfall zu bewirken, der bis zu einer halben Stunde dauern kann.
It is ultimately imparting large amounts of electricity, many times the voltage you would get even if you stuck your finger into a light socket.
Tatsächlich wird bei der EKT genug Spannung verwendet, um 2 Aufzüge, einen Hafenkran oder 5 Flutlichter zu betreiben.
This is an electroconvulsive therapy machine, also called a shock machine. The purpose of this instrument is to run an electric current through the head of a patient. These are the 2 electrodes. The machine applies a voltage to these 2 electrodes, and that causes a current to flow through the patient's brain, and that constitutes the treatment. So if we set this dial to 100%, then this instrument is set to pass 3 billion electrons through the patient's head during one treatment.
Ein EKT-Gerät hat nahezu 430 Mal die elektrische Ausgangsleistung einer Elektroschockpistole. Die Geräte selbst sind sehr einfach. Sie leiten Elektrizität in einen Kondensator, ein Bauelement zum Speichern elektrischer Ladung, das es dem Gerät erlaubt, eine bis zu 2-mal höhere Ladung als eine Steckdose zu speichern. Auf Knopfdruck jagen Psychiater diese massive Ladung Hochspannungsstrom direkt durch den Schädel. Das Gehirn allerdings ist ein sehr empfindliches Instrument, das aus etwa 100 Milliarden Neuronen besteht. Es interpretiert und übermittelt unzählige Signale, die für die Kontrolle des Körpers notwendig sind. Mehr als 5 Billionen Signale pro Sekunde. Das Gehirn funktioniert mit weniger als 2/10 eines Volts an Elektrizität. Das ist fast 8-mal weniger als eine Uhrenbatterie. Vergleichen Sie das mit der potenziellen Spannung, die bei einer einzigen Schockbehandlung auf das Gehirn einwirkt. 2300 Mal die Elektrizität, die das Gehirn zum Funktionieren benötigt. Das entspricht der Wucht von einem Preisboxer ins Gesicht geschlagen zu werden.
And the outcome of that is it destroys brain cells. And the more brain cells you destroy, in theory, the better it is for the person. The biggest mystery of all is why on earth people think that putting bolts of electricity through people's heads is a good idea.
Psychiater geben Patienten Schocks, um einen sogenannten therapeutischen Anfall hervorzubringen. Aber so etwas gibt es nicht.
When we're in emergency departments and someone comes in with a seizure, that is a bona fide emergency, and we hop right to and try to stop the seizure immediately and its side effects and the things that it causes.
Ein Krampfanfall ist eine plötzliche elektrische Entladung im Gehirn, die das Verhalten, die Empfindung oder das Bewusstsein verändert. Krampfanfälle können das Ergebnis einer Krankheit wie Epilepsie sein oder durch externe Kräfte verursacht werden.
There are seizures that are fever-induced, or if it's alcohol withdrawn, or if it is caused by hallucinogens or by cocaine or methamphetamine. Those things, when the patient stops using them, they improve.
Aber beim Elektroschock bringen Psychiater Krampfanfälle in ihrer schlimmsten Form hervor. Diese heißen Grand Mal-Anfälle und werden durch abnormale elektrische Aktivität im gesamten Gehirn verursacht.
Okay, grand mal seizure is when you go unconscious and have a lot of spasmodic muscular contractions which can hurt you, and you lose control of your bladder and bowels.
They could stop breathing, they could bite their tongue, arch their back to such an extent as to cause a fracture of the spine. It's just a complete disorganization of neurologic function where a person has no control over their body.
The more seizures a person has, the more potential there is for cognitive decline, different neurologic dysfunctions, and more seizures.
Having recurrent seizures potentially reduces the lifespan of that individual. It has an impact on mortality.
Jedes Jahr sterben 45.000 Amerikaner durch Krampfanfälle. Das sind genauso viele wie durch Verkehrsunfälle sterben.
You know, mainstream physicians go to great lengths to prevent seizures. Epilepsy, seizure disorder, is a medical problem that we give medication for in order to prevent any seizures, not just some seizures. The idea is to prevent seizures, to prevent brain damage, because it's recognized that seizure activity promotes brain damage.
Dennoch behaupten Schockärzte, es sei therapeutisch und verursachen deshalb bewusst Grand Mal-Anfälle.
I became part of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is an international watchdog investigating psychiatric abuses, because I've had shock treatment. I know the damage that it caused. I know what damage it did, not just to me, but to my family who had to get me through that. You know, when I was very young, I felt depressed, but what I didn't know is that I actually had an underactive thyroid. I was sent to a psychiatrist by my GP, and he said, well, you need shock treatment. The shock is like a grenade going off in the body. The violence of this, it's like every nerve and every cell is being electrified and with such force. And you come out of it and you know that that body is never going to be the same again. When I woke up, I was so disjointed. I didn't know where I was. I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I looked at this person standing next to my bed, and I didn't know who it was. I said, well, who are you? And she said, I'm your mother. Electroshock is torture being passed off as therapy. It is a betrayal.
Wie kommen Psychiater mit solch einer barbarischen Behandlung durch? Ihre Geschichte ist davon übersät. In den 20ern behauptete Psychiater Manfred Sakel, dass er psychisch kranke Patienten erfolgreich behandeln kann, indem er kranke Gehirnzellen abtötet. In Wirklichkeit schuf er gehirnschädigende Krampfanfälle unter Verwendung von Insulin, das 5% aller Patienten tötete und andere in Schwachsinnige verwandelte. Der ungarische Neuropsychiater Ladislas Meduna behauptete, dass er Geisteskrankheit durch hirnschädigende Krampfanfälle austreiben könne, die durch Metrazol verursacht wurden. Aber auch das scheiterte.
Since its inception, psychiatry has really had 4 modalities of treatment that they recircle over and over again. Cut it, burn it, drug it, shock it to the human mind. So when one of their treatments fails, they use it to promote the next one.
Infolge der durch Metrazol verursachten Schäden wandten Psychiater sich der präfrontalen Lobotomie als neueste Methode der Wunderheilung zu. Unter Verwendung des Eispickels zerkleinerten Psychiater die Gehirne ihrer Patienten und schufen so zigtausende menschliche Trottel, bis die heftige Opposition die Psychiater dazu zwang, dieses abscheuliche Verfahren aufzugeben. In der Zwischenzeit hatten sie sich bereits einem neuen Durchbruch zugewandt: Elektrizität.
Hugo Streletti wrote in his own documents that he was inspired to develop electroshock by his observation of pigs being led to slaughter. And he saw that the effect of shock on these pigs was to make them more docile and controllable, and it made them not even fight for their own survival.
Im Laufe der nächsten 2 Jahre machte Streletti an einer Vielzahl von Tieren Elektroschock-Experimente.
Streletti progressed to taking homeless people off the street and subjecting them to electric shock.
Gemäß Streletti selbst flehte sein erstes menschliches Opfer, ein Obdachloser, ihn an, nicht nochmal geschockt zu werden. Strelettis Kollege, Psychiater Lothar Kalinowski, war Zeuge der Schrecken dieses ersten Verfahrens, wie seine Frau sich erinnert.
He came home for lunch, as white as a sheet, and said, "Today I saw something terrible." And he described the first electroshock treatment, and he ended with, "I never want to see this again."
Trotz der offensichtlichen Schäden, die Psychiater durch Elektroschock verursachten, verbreitete sich das lukrative Verfahren bald in ganz Europa und den Vereinigten Staaten. Von den 40ern an war Elektroschock weit verbreitet. Und das in seiner primitivsten Form.
The original idea was that you would invoke a convulsion. And of course, by definition, if you're having a convulsion, your body is jerking. The problem was that people's bodies were jerking so much, they were breaking their shoulders, they were breaking their necks, bones were being broken.
Aber das hielt Psychiater nicht davon ab, dieses brutale Verfahren der Öffentlichkeit zu vermarkten.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs, who might still be here if it were not for this helpful form of treatment.
ECT has been around since I was a medical student, and I graduated from medical school 60 years ago this year. I considered it, as a medical student, having observed a few of them, I guess the kindest thing I could say is barbarian. I thought it was truly one of the most obnoxious things I'd ever seen done to a human being. A huge percentage of these people have brain damage.
In den 50ern wurde der durch Elektroschock verursachte Hirnschaden zu ausgeprägt, um ignoriert zu werden. Psychiater verdrehten es also zu ihrem Vorteil.
Experts like Walter Freeman would say that the reason that ECT works is because it causes brain damage.
Maybe it will be shown that a mentally ill patient can think more clearly and more constructively with less brain in actual operation.
Das war das erklärte Ziel: weniger Gehirn.
In the 1940s and the 1950s, it was very open in the medical literature that the way electroshock, quote, worked was by brain damage. And yet they went on to say that this was somehow going to end up being beneficial for the patient, when all it really ended up with was brain damage.
Diese Marketingstrategie änderte sich 1975 schlagartig, als der Film Einer flog über das Kuckucksnest die Brutalität aufdeckte.
The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest forever changed the course of the public's perception of electroshock therapy because it was so accurately portrayed in the film. It was so obviously torture.
Da der Elektroschock nun unter die Lupe genommen wurde, begannen die Medien, seinen menschlichen Tribut zu dokumentieren.
Just like it's true that you can chemically control someone, yes, you can electrically shock someone out of their so-called crazy mind, but you don't shock them back into their right mind. You shock them into a shocked mind.
Sogar der anerkannte Urvater des Elektroschocks in den USA bestätigte dessen Schaden.
The principal complications of ECT are death, brain damage, memory impairment, and spontaneous seizures.
Gonna do another one, Paul? I think so. These are short seizures.
Angesichts der Entrüstung der Öffentlichkeit erfanden Psychiater eine neue Wunderheilmethode: Psychopharmaka. Aber auch diese erwiesen sich als ineffektiv und gefährlich und kamen einer chemischen Lobotomie gleich. Psychiater hatten eine Lösung: den Elektroschock zu recyceln und neu zu verpacken.
Electroshock was so abhorrent to the American public that psychiatry came up with a PR campaign to change its name to electroconvulsive therapy. But it is not therapy. It has never been therapy.
Um den Schaden zu verschleiern, fügten Schockärzte Narkose und muskelentspannende Mittel hinzu, um die Krämpfe ihrer Patienten zu unterdrücken. Sie vermarkteten die EKT als modern und machen das heute noch immer.
Well, electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT today, is nothing like what you've seen in the movies. It's a modern medical procedure.
Modern ECT is a lot better than old-fashioned ECT.
It doesn't look at all barbaric now.
Aber hinter der Fassade ihres Verkaufsgerätes ist der Elektroschock genauso brutal, wie er immer war. Und das Ergebnis bleibt das gleiche: ein Grand Mal-Anfall und Gehirnschäden. Das Einzige, das sich verändert hat, ist das Marketing.
I was a psychiatric nurse for 22 years, and I worked at a facility that did ECTs on adults. I became a whistleblower because I saw things that were being done to patients that were wrong, were unlawful, unethical. We used to tell our patients who would go in for ECT, things are not the same as they used to be back in the 1950s. And at the consultation, we would give out these videos called Shock. And our overall pitch to patients was, we don't know how it works. We just know that it does. We would compare it to rebooting a computer. The patients were led to believe this was somehow a miracle. And it wasn't a miracle. I didn't see any miracles, and I was in the business.
Ein Geschäft, in dem EKT-Geräte schon immer Gehirnschäden verursacht haben.
Here we have two electroconvulsive therapy machines. This one is from the 1940s, and this one is a much more modern machine from the 2000s. They both have the same potential to do damage to the brain by running large amounts of electricity through the brain cells with the risk that cells will be damaged or killed.
Dennoch zeigen EKT-Werbefilme Psychiater, die genau das Gegenteil behaupten.
ECT is the gold standard treatment for that type of depression. It's a small amount of current. It's nothing like what's in the outlet at home, okay?
Das ist eine typische und weit verbreitete Lüge. Im Gegensatz zu EKT-Geräten sind Steckdosen nicht dazu gedacht, Leute zu schocken. In den Vereinigten Staaten besitzen sie Sicherungen, die den Strom bei 6/1000 Ampere abschalten, eine Einheit, die die Stärke des elektrischen Stroms misst. Moderne EKT-Geräte jedoch verabreichen zwischen 800 und 900/1000 Ampere. Das ist 150 Mal über dem gesetzlichen Grenzwert zum Schutz gegen Stromschläge. Und das geht durch die Köpfe der EKT-Patienten.
I was only 24 years old, and I didn't have anything except what you call the baby blues. My hormones were completely messed up after having a child. My husband was told that the best way to handle this was to take me to a psychiatrist. And the next thing I know, they have me in a hospital, and they shocked me. And you would just wake up not knowing where you are or how you got there. And they would send me back, and they would just continue to do this over and over and over and over again. You just got shocked whether you wanted to be shocked or not. They just have to keep hitting your head with that hammer. They gave me 28 shock treatments. They took my soul, my mind, my intellect, my emotions. They put electricity to it. They ran it through my head and literally raped my soul.
Die moderne Neuverpackung vom Elektroschock birgt mehr Gefahren als nur die Elektrizität.
The drug they use as a relaxant in the US before you receive electroshock is also the drug they use for lethal injections.
Es wird Succinylcholin genannt. Es lähmt alle Muskeln des Körpers, außer dem Herz. Aufgrund seiner Effektivität beim Stoppen der Atmung wird das Medikament regelmäßig bei der Hinrichtung von Gefangenen im Todestrakt verwendet. Psychiater verwenden es bei der Elektrokrampftherapie.
The same drug that's used to kill the person in the execution by paralyzing his breathing also paralyzes his breathing during the shock treatment, which is why the anesthesiologist actually has to ventilate the patient during the procedure. Same drug, same effect.
Modern electroshock is being given under sterile conditions in a regular operating room, looking very much like a regular medical operation, and it's all much more acceptable to anybody who would observe it. In fact, the literature shows that electroshock given under general anesthesia may even be more brain damaging than electroshock as it was given before.
Der Grund? Die anästhetischen und lähmenden Medikamente erhöhen auch die Schwelle des Krampfanfalls, was eine erhöhte Intensität des elektrischen Stroms zur Erzeugung eines Krampfanfalls erforderlich macht. Und umso mehr Elektroschockbehandlungen ein Patient erhält, umso höher steigt seine Schwelle. Also kurbeln Psychiater die Elektrizität jedes Mal noch weiter hinauf. Das verursacht Hirnschäden, ob der Patient unter dem Einfluss von Beruhigungsmitteln steht oder nicht.
When you give a shock treatment and you give the anesthesia, it does nothing to protect their brain. So you can only protect their body while you're destroying their mind.
It's like this. If you are awake and get hit with a baseball bat, it's obvious that we would feel a lot of pain. But if you're unconscious and get hit with a baseball bat, your body goes through that same trauma. So why are we acting as if in our society that the body doesn't go through trauma just because somebody is conscious or not conscious?
Die frühen Schockärzte verwendeten 80 Volt, nichts im Vergleich zu dem, was moderne EKT-Geräte abgeben. Tatsächlich empfiehlt ein Hersteller von Elektroschockgeräten, dass Psychiater die Stärke bis zu 6-mal höher stellen als nötig, um einen Krampfanfall herbeizuführen.
We have here a Spectrum 4000 ECT machine, which is a modern device. It's connected to 2 resistors here, which is typical of the resistance that a patient's head would present to an ECT machine. I'm going to hit the treat button and we'll be able to see if there's any temperature rise using the heat gun. I'll press the treat button. 112, 118, 120. So, we see that the current that the ECT machine forced through these resistors caused them to heat up from approximately 75 degrees to 120 degrees. The cells can get too hot, they can be damaged, or even die.
If you look at the MRI of their brain, they have areas that have disappeared. They're wasting away, just like somebody with Alzheimer's.
Es ist das Ergebnis von der bis zu 450-fachen Stromstärke eines Viehtreibers getroffen zu werden. Aber für viele ist der Schaden weit mehr als nur physisch.
Every time I look in the mirror, I try to wonder who I am. Just try to kind of put the pieces together of who I used to be. I started an antidepressant, and then it was just multiple cocktails of drugs, of antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleeping medication, stimulants. And I just deemed treatment resistant. And then at 21, I was given electroshock. I went through a neurocognitive testing 6 months after, and I lost approximately about 50 points of IQ. My IQ is measured at 78, which I think that 75 is rendered mentally retarded. It's a constant identity crisis that I deal with. I do consider shock treatment torture because it damaged me physically and mentally in every way, and it's just it's like every day I'm reliving the shock because I don't know who I am. They say that it's safe and effective, but I think I'm living proof that it's not.
Psychiater befinden sich überhaupt nicht in der Position zu behaupten, Elektroschock sei sicher oder effektiv. Denn ihre Kenntnis seiner Grundlagen ist sehr mangelhaft.
Electrical engineers understand how electricity works, and biomedical engineers understand the effects that electric currents can have on human tissue. Psychiatrists, however, typically don't receive the kind of training to make them understand electricity, what it is, what it does, what it can do to the human body. So we have in this case an operator who is merely trained to set the knobs and push the buttons without understanding the ramifications of what he's doing.
Ein Schockarzt, der von einem Gericht bezüglich seiner Ausbildung im Bereich Elektrizität befragt wurde, belegt dies.
What is an amp?
What is an amp? It's been a long time since high school physics, and I couldn't give you a scientific definition of what an amperage is.
Do you have a definition of a volt?
A volt. A volt might be the power at which an amperage is pushed through an electrical wire.
You're not quite sure what these terms mean, are you?
I'm not quite sure.
One of the settings that you put on your dials on your machine is hertz, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know what the term hertz actually means?
I don't.
Do you tell your patients about your level of understanding of the resistance of the brain to the electricity you're sending through it?
No.
Do you think they might want to know before they lay their head down on the operating table to have you give them shock treatment?
No one's ever asked.
Vor seiner Aussage hat Dr. Joseph Johnson über 1800 Schockbehandlungen durchgeführt. Aber Dr. Johnson ist nicht der Einzige, der erbärmlich unwissend bezüglich der grundlegenden Prinzipien und Begriffe der Elektrizität ist. Die Lehrpläne von psychiatrischen Ausbildungseinrichtungen enthalten wenig zu dem Fachgebiet. Und Psychiater werden zugeben, dass sie nicht wissen, wie ihre sogenannte Behandlung funktioniert.
Electroshock is as much art as science because how it works is still a mystery.
Do you know how it works, Jonathan?
I don't think anybody really knows how it works.
There's no specific answer to that question.
People don't understand why this works or how it works.
How does it work? Well, as a field, we are focusing on researching that question.
We don't really know, is what you're saying.
We don't have the complete answers. However, it's not a complete cure.
Wie Psychiater damit durchkommen, ist ein weiteres Rätsel.
A cardiologist, orthopedic surgeons, other physicians in other specialties really just couldn't get away with using tools of their trades with knowing so little about it as shock doctors do about what they're doing.
Und dennoch kommen Psychiater jedes Mal damit durch, wenn sie dieses Verfahren verwenden.
Psychiatrists will tell you that they don't know exactly how ECT works. But what they do know is that it causes brain damage, organ failure, it can kill someone, it can cause seizures. They do know that much, but they can't tell us how it actually works.
Der Schockpsychiater Richard Abrams, Miteigentümer des EKT-Geräteherstellers Somatics, gab seine Unwissenheit unter Eid zu.
Do you have any understanding as to the mechanics of how ECT works?
I do not.
All right. Would you agree that that's the general state of the industry still today? That the practitioners of ECT don't have an understanding of how it works?
That's correct.
Derselbe Richard Abrams schrieb das Standardwerk über die EKT. Genau derselbe Psychiater, der zugibt, nicht zu wissen, wie Elektroschock funktioniert, schrieb ein Lehrbuch, das wissenschaftlich und autoritär zu sein scheint, während er EKT-Geräte herstellt und sie auf der ganzen Welt verkauft. Währenddessen verwenden Praktizierende der EKT diese Geräte, um ihre Opfer mit mehr Spannung zu verprügeln als eine industrielle Druckerpresse.
They see that as their job. Give the patient the drugs and they push the red button and zap him. But they don't study the underlying science because there isn't any.
My personal experience as a psychiatry resident was I was doing a rotation. All of a sudden, my supervisor says, "Oh, you're on the rotation for ECT next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?" I've had no training, no instruction whatsoever. I arrive at the room. I walk in. There's the anesthetist. There's the nurse. There's the equipment. The patient's wheeled in. And now I have to set the settings on the machine. So I look at the log and I say, "Oh, well, the last time this person had a treatment, the settings were this and this." So I adjust the dials. Person gets treated. Next patient who comes in, it's their first course of ECT, the very first treatment. So there's nothing in the logbook. So then I go, I guess I'll just do halfway in between the last two patients. Set the dials, off we go. That's literally the experience I had. No supervision, no follow-up, nothing.
Sogar alteingesessene Schockärzte wissen nicht, wie viel Elektrizität bei einem neuen Patienten einen Krampfanfall erzeugen wird. Im Grunde heißt das einfach ausprobieren. Nehmen Sie als Beispiel Charles Kellner, ein bekannter EKT-Psychiater, der sie im nationalen Fernsehen demonstriert.
Preparing the sites for the electrodes for the delivery of the stimulus.
Okay.
Okay, treating. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Still didn't get it? Quiet. Got it. Okay. Now she's having a seizure.
Half an hour after her seizure, Terry is in recovery.
Your treatment went really well. I want you to know that, okay?
The very next day, Terry is back.
Do you recognize me? No, I'm Dr. Kellner.
Einem Patienten 3 gehirnschädigende Schocks in Folge zuzufügen, ist nicht nur Körperverletzung. Die EKT verkrüppelt jeden, der sie erhält. Als einer der eifrigsten Unterstützer des Schocks gestand Psychologe Harold Succom unter Eid.
Altered cognition is the most common side effect of ECT. That memory loss occurs, it's universal, and in some individuals it can be profound.
Beeinträchtigung der kognitiven Fähigkeiten ist keine Kleinigkeit. Es handelt sich um eine grundlegende Verschlechterung der bedeutendsten Zentren der Hirnfunktion, die das emotionale Bewusstsein, die Selbsterkenntnis, das Urteilsvermögen und die Erinnerung kontrollieren. Und Gedächtnisverlust ist das Erste, was EKT-Opfer bemerken.
It wasn't until I was at Shoal Creek that I saw a psychiatrist. And little did I know, after I signed myself in freely, that I couldn't leave for 72 hours. I wouldn't leave my room. I couldn't be around other people. I was terrified, and every time I went for another treatment of ECT, I got more and more paranoid. My head was exploding for days. I couldn't do anything but fall on the bed and sleep for 16 hours or something. I'd have to write everything down and then remember where I wrote it. My family would tell me, "Look at your book. Look at your book." I had to carry this book around with me all the time. My first service dog I got because if I left the apartment to go check the mail, I would get lost. I couldn't remember the number of the apartment. I'd just wander around. When I applied for disability, I had to go to the office and take some kind of test. I couldn't tell them my name. I couldn't tell them where I lived. I couldn't tell them how to get to my house. I couldn't tell them the president. I couldn't tell them anything. And my older sister told me that they asked her, "Is she like this all the time?" And she said, "Pretty much."
I spent 30 years working in the psychiatric system, principally as a clinical psychologist. And during that time, I saw numerous patients who'd received electroshock. I spoke with numerous psychiatrists who delivered electroshock. And it was really after that I became kind of intrigued as to what was going on and why were these people delivering it. And more to the point, why did so many of my patients have long-term memory problems? There's a thing called anterograde amnesia, which is you lose your memory for everything after the shock, so you don't create new memories. And then there's retrograde amnesia, which is you lose memories for things immediately before the shock.
There's only been a few studies done in the last 33 years on permanent amnesia over the long term, 6 months or greater. And what they found, when they look for it, they find it. But they tend just not to look for it.
They knew about permanent memory loss a long time ago, and they actually instructed the field to say that it wasn't permanent, that it wasn't long-term, to use words such as transient, words such as spotty, words such as temporary, to minimize these adverse events.
Aber außerhalb ihrer Kliniken bekennen Psychiater sich offen dazu, dass Gedächtnisverlust ein hervorstechendes Merkmal des Elektroschocks ist.
Clearly there are risks with ECT. That's been well established for a long time. Some people have regretted doing it because of memory impairment.
Memory loss occurs when patients get electroconvulsive therapy.
The amnesia problem with memory.
They have some memory problems that persist more than we'd like.
While someone's going through ECT, they have pretty profound memory loss.
Sometimes, they can impact the patient pretty severely.
It's like a little volcano inside the brain.
You get more bang for your buck with ECT. If you pardon the pun, you know.
Aber Schockpsychiater machen vor ihren Patienten selten solche aufrichtigen Geständnisse.
The industry has variously represented that ECT's benefits exceed its disadvantages. They don't deny that there are disadvantages to ECT, they minimize them. It's a sales pitch.
Und diese Masche stammt von PR-Firmen, die mediengeschulten Psychiatern Gesprächsthemen geben.
ECT is the fastest and most effective treatment that we have.
It's the most effective treatment that we have today for severe depression.
The single most effective treatment we have for depression.
Is the most effective
really
treatment.
Effective for depression. It's
ECT
more effective
is
than
more
medication.
effective than antidepressant
More
therapies.
effective than many of the psychotropic
ECT
medications.
remains number one.
More than medication, more than therapy, more than ketamine.
One of the most effective treatments for anything in medicine.
Aber ihre nachgeplapperten Zeilen sind Meinungsmache, nicht Wissenschaft.
Shock psychiatrists blame all kinds of adverse effects of ECT on the patient or their underlying mental condition. For example, memory loss or inability to make executive decisions are blamed on the person's underlying depression when it's an effect of the ECT.
Zusätzlich zu dem zugefügten Kopftrauma kann die EKT Schäden im ganzen Körper anrichten.
That's why when you get ECT, there's a crash cart there in case the heart goes into an abnormal rhythm. And if that happens, the doctors have that there in order to bring the person back to life.
Obwohl es viele dokumentierte Fälle von Beeinträchtigungen durch Elektroschock gibt, weisen Psychiater sie als Einzelberichte ab. Sie ignorieren sogar ihre eigenen Studien, die zeigen, dass die EKT keinen Wert hat.
Sham ECT is basically placebo-controlled, where the person's wheeled into the room, they're put to sleep, electrodes are put on their head, buttons pushed, but there's no electricity. And so the patient doesn't know if they got real or sham. There's only 12 or 13 of those kind of studies ever. And when you pool them together, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere that people who've had ECT are better off 1 month later.
Aber jene, die sich einer echten EKT unterwerfen, sind häufig in der Tretmühle der Schockindustrie gefangen.
Just like with psychiatric drugs and in the psych hospital, they keep coming back. We used to call them frequent flyers. They would be readmitted. We see the same patients coming in and out.
Aber Psychiater wie Sarah Lisenby beschuldigen den Patienten für seinen Rückfall und nicht die Behandlung für ihr Scheitern.
Is without a maintenance treatment, you can have rapid relapse, but with maintenance treatment, you can have sustained relapse prevention.
Can I ask you, Dr. Listenby, what you think the minimum length of time is that is required to demonstrate an effect of the device?
Well, I guess I'm saying that I guess I'm trying to answer by analogy. ECT is an effective intervention without any form of relapse prevention. Patients will relapse very quickly.
Die Fakten bezüglich dem, was Psychiater als Rückfall bezeichnen, sind folgende. Die durch die EKT verursachten Gehirntraumata sind erheblich. Vergleichbar mit der Wucht eines 18 Kilo Betonziegels, der aus 2 Metern Höhe auf den Kopf fällt. Um diese katastrophalen Schäden zu beheben, strömt das Gehirn Chemikalien aus, die ein Gefühl der Euphorie verursachen. Aber das schwindet schnell und die Probleme der Person kommen oft überraschend heftig zurück. Und wenn das passiert, verschreiben Psychiater weitere Elektroschocks. Sie nennen sie Erhaltungs-, Fortsetzungs- oder Auffrischungs-EKT.
The nature of depression is that it is usually a relapsing illness.
Regular recurring ECT treatments may be needed.
Many people often go on to get what's called maintenance.
Ongoing maintenance therapy is provided.
And then you need another 10 ECT.
This is going to be a repeated pattern of these people are going to be on courses of treatment that will last for the rest of their lives.
And, you know, the average today is about 35 treatments of shock every year. And of course it doesn't work, it just makes them worse and it damages.
Die Psychiater und EKT-Gerätehersteller Richard Abrams und Conrad Swartz gaben diesen Mangel an Ergebnissen in einem Brief an die FDA zu. Es ist nicht überraschend, dass Auswertungen, die Wochen oder Monate nach Abschluss der akuten EKT-Behandlung durchgeführt wurden, normalerweise keinen signifikanten Vorteil der EKT zeigen. Die EKT verursacht nicht nur Gehirnschäden und zerstört Körperfunktionen, sie kann auch tödlich sein.
It can make people suicidal, either just contemplating suicide or actually going out and taking their lives.
The man who left an indelible impression on English literature is dead. Ernest Hemingway died of a self-inflicted wound at his Ketchum, Idaho home.
Der Nobelpreisträger Ernest Hemingway beging Selbstmord, kurz nachdem er einer Reihe von Elektroschocks ausgesetzt war. Vor seinem Tod verkündete er: Welchen Sinn hat es, meinen Kopf zu ruinieren, mir mein Gedächtnis und damit mein Kapital auszulöschen und mich arbeitsunfähig zu machen? Es war eine großartige Behandlung, aber der Patient ist tot.
And we know that by doing ECT, the suicide rate, you're 13 times more likely to commit suicide if you do the ECT than if you had never done it.
I was bullied at school, being abused at home. So then, you know, the doctor tells me, well, we want to try a new treatment with you. She's like, we call it ECT. I was 17 years old when I received ECT for the first time. Here I am, you know, I'm a scrawny 110-pound kid, and you got these guys that are like ex-military UFC-looking fighters just grabbing me, throwing me in a room, and stabbing me with an injection, putting leather restraints on my arms. Then all I remember is waking up in my room. My head felt like it was on fire. It was like the worst headache I've ever had. And then I started panicking because I didn't know who I was. I don't remember my name. I don't remember anything. I remember what happened the day before. It was, you know, I didn't remember anything at all. When I came back, I wasn't used to my home, my neighborhood, nothing. And the next 4 years are blank. And it got to the point where I got fed up with it. So I took like half of my Prozac and I just, you know, put it in my mouth, put myself like a self-induced coma. I remember I was just in my bed all day cutting myself, trying drowning myself. hanging myself, thinking of ways I could end my life, putting a plastic bag around my head, tying it, and going under my blankets. Just wait. I already, even to this day, I'm still suicidal. I mean, if you don't care about your memories or your life or anything like that, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. You know, if you love pain, you know, you love headaches and all that, yeah, go do it. But, you know, if you want to remember your life, you want to remember your friends and all the good times, yeah, don't do it.
One of the dangers of ECT is death. That's known. It's actually reported in MedWatch reports in the FDA. You had a death that occurred to a patient just hours after they received ECT. So, does ECT cause death? Yes, it does.
Researchers at Brown University looked at the effect of ECT in the elderly. They looked at depressed elderly patients who were given ECT and compared them to depressed elderly patients who got usual medical treatment. And they found that the death rate after just 1 year among the ECT recipients was 27%, compared to an over 96% survival rate among the people who were treated without electric shock.
Mit anderen Worten, Senioren, die Elektroschock erhielten, starben mit der mehr als 6-fachen Rate jener, die keinen erhielten.
So one of the demonstrations I like to do with ECT is show the difference in the amount of electricity based on the age. So if a person is 20 years old and you do the electric shock, this is how long it is. If a person is 70 years old, this is the length. So the longer the electric shock is based on how old you are.
So 2/3 of the recipients of electroshock are women. Something like 3/4 of them are over the age of 60. I think the oldest person to receive electroshock was 104.
Aber der frühe Tod beschränkt sich nicht nur auf ältere Menschen. Durch eine große Studie mit über 3000 EKT-Patienten wurde festgestellt, dass EKT-Empfänger aller Altersgruppen eine erhöhte Sterberate aufwiesen, unabhängig von der Ursache. Sogar die amerikanische Psychiatrievereinigung berichtet, dass Elektroschock tötet. Sie behaupten jedoch, dass es sich nur um einen von 10.000 Patienten handelt. Eine Vermutung, die von Richard Abrams gemacht wurde, dem Psychiater, der EKT-Geräte herstellt und verkauft. Dies sind die Zahlen. Der Bundesstaat Texas berichtet, dass eine von 350 Personen innerhalb von 2 Wochen nach dem Erhalt einer EKT starb. Das ist 50 Mal höher als die Mordrate der USA und 30 Mal höher als die Behauptung der APA. Selbst wenn Patienten die EKT verweigern, sind sie an den meisten Orten der Welt noch nicht sicher.
So if a person determines, I don't want ECT, the psychiatrist can actually go to a judge who can determine that he's not competent to make his own medical decisions and override his own decision about what he wants done to himself and his body and actually deliver him electroconvulsive therapy against his will.
I was assigned to a psychiatrist who was very aggressive in his manner and trying to get me to agree to do ECT. You know, I was skeptical and I said, no, I don't want to do it. The psychiatrist pretty much threatened me. He said that if I don't agree to it, then they can get a court order. My family actually sided with me. They said that they shouldn't do this to me against my wishes. Basically, all the doctors said that I needed to have ECT and that I was not in my right mind to refuse. The probate court judge agreed with them and he issued the court order, and that was how they started the forced ECT on me. I was pretty much tortured. I was being forced to have this treatment. I didn't like it, I didn't want it, and when I was honest with the doctors about how it affected me and I told them, they just interpreted that as part of my depression. I realized that the only way to stop this was to start lying, so that's what I did. What was done to me was really, frankly, evil. It's a barbaric treatment, and that it shouldn't be done to people against their will like it was done to me.
With psychiatry, like most of their treatments, these are frequently given without consent of the patient because it is the only quote-unquote medical field where their authority supersedes your rights, an individual's rights to consent to treatment.
If it breaks their skin like an injection, or if it's a drug that you feed into them one way or another, or if it's electroshock therapy, that is violating a person's sovereignty over his own body. A person has a right to their own body. They have a right not to be violated.
Der UN-Sonderberichterstatter über Folter ist sehr eindeutig in seiner Verurteilung von Zwangs-EKT.
Against your will, electroshock therapy is, in my opinion, absolutely prohibited. I have seen so many persons who have been subjected to electroshocks in order to extract a confession or information, etc. And it's one of the worst feelings of pain you can imagine. If this electric current is really runs through your body, so it's the contractions. It might even lead to death. In my opinion, they are torture.
Und einige der frühesten Verwendungen der EKT waren buchstäblich Folter. Während der Zeit des Nationalsozialismus verabreichten deutsche Psychiater tödliche Stöße EKT an Anstaltspatienten, die als lebensuntauglich befunden wurden. Im Algerienkrieg in den 50ern gaben Psychiater Gefangenen Elektroschocks, bevor sie befragt wurden. Der CIA bildete marokkanische Sicherheitsdienste in der Verwendung eines Elektroschockgeräts für Verhöre aus. Psychiater in der Sowjetunion verwendeten Elektroschock, um politische Dissidenten zu bestrafen, die sich weigerten, sich der Parteilinie unterzuordnen.
In South Africa, ECT was used as a torturous method of treatment for a group that mental health considered to be animals, because they actually had the idea that if you were black, you couldn't feel pain.
One of the original ECT devices, which was actually manufactured in the UK, called the Page Russell, was used for torture in Arabic countries and was used on political prisoners. So how do you call something help or treatment when it's been used for torture?
Psychiater verwenden Elektroschocks auch im Bereich der sogenannten Gedankenkontrolle.
In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered.
Der berüchtigte Psychiater Ewan Cameron führte Experimente durch, die Leute in einen Koma-ähnlichen Tiefschlaf versetzten, wobei er Drogen und Elektroschocks mit hoher Spannung verwendete und sie in einen kindlichen Zustand herabsetzte.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world.
Ein eifriger Befürworter von Camerons Behandlung war der australische Psychiater Harry Bailey.
Dr. Harry Bailey studied a treatment called deep sleep therapy, and it involved knocking a person unconscious with a cocktail of psychiatric drugs, usually barbiturates and sedative hypnotics. And while they were in that comatose state, they were given electroshock treatment, sometimes twice daily. The patients were dying. There were 48 deaths. Over 1,100 patients were subjected to this. They all had brain damage. They all had personality changes. They had blood clots. They were seriously damaged by this so-called treatment.
Tonight, why was deep sleep therapy ever allowed to happen at Chelmsford?
The analogy with the appalling medical experimentation by Nazi doctors is difficult to avoid.
Certainly the information that we gave to the Attorney General's Department showed clearly that very often patients were given electric shock treatment without their consent.
The question has remained ever since then, why hasn't the matter been satisfactorily resolved?
CCHR, along with the Chelmsford Victims Action Group, got local media. There were demonstrations on the steps of Parliament demanding a government inquiry into deep sleep treatment. And we worked with legislators and we agitated for reforms, and it actually produced some of the biggest reforms Australia's ever seen.
Good evening. There will be a royal commission into the controversial Chelmsford Hospital deep sleep treatment.
Let me tell you that this royal commission will get to the bottom of all of the abuses that have gone on in the system.
And it was through our investigations, through the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, working with patients and their families who had undergone this deep sleep treatment, we ended up having deep sleep treatment banned.
Heute dehnen Psychiater den Elektroschock auf neue Bevölkerungsgruppen aus. Schwangeren Frauen wird jetzt gesagt, dass Elektroschock für sie und ihr ungeborenes Kind sicher sei.
When a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't drink coffee, she's not supposed to smoke. There's a whole list of things that are bad for the baby when it's in the prenatal stage. However, pregnant women are getting electric shock, causing miscarriages.
It boggles the mind that something like this can be given to a woman who is growing a baby in her body, that of course the electricity is going to affect her and her unborn child.
Kinder werden ein immer größeres Angriffsziel für Psychiater.
It's a horrible idea to give electroconvulsive therapy to children. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but it only makes sense that repeated seizures like that could cause cognitive difficulties, learning difficulties, and damage to the nervous system as it's developing.
You're going to destroy an adult brain, just think what you could do with a child brain. You could do much more damage. Take away his whole future.
Es gibt einen sehr guten wissenschaftlichen Grund dafür, warum Kinder nie einer EKT unterzogen werden sollten.
In a fully matured brain, there are between 60 and 90 billion nerve cells. And when they die, they are not replaced. But in children, the brain is still developing. So if a cell is killed in an adult, that is one less brain cell the person has to operate with. But if a cell is killed in a child, then not only does he lose that cell, but he loses all the other cells that cell would have created during the development of the brain. So ECT is more dangerous to children even than it is to adults.
Right now in the United States, through Freedom of Information Act, CCHR has uncovered the fact that 16 states are currently electroshocking children and adolescents, and 5 of those states are electroshocking children aged 0 to 5.
Psychiatrists give electroshock to children all over the world. In Australia, children as young as 4 receive electroshock. In Turkey, 9-year-old children receive it explicitly as a punishment.
I'm an ex-law enforcement officer. Much milder things can land people in jail than to send a child through that type of trauma. We have a society where a parent can't even spank a child, but psychiatrists can put 400 volts through the brain of a child.
Under the definition, it's abuse in no other way. You are inflicting harm to a child under the guise of treatment.
Die Weltgesundheitsorganisation gab eine strenge Aufforderung heraus. Es gibt keine Hinweise für den Nutzen von Elektroschock bei Minderjährigen und daher sollte dies durch Gesetzgebung verboten werden. Dennoch haben sowohl die Vorsitzende und der CEO der amerikanischen Psychiatrievereinigung den Leiter der FDA offiziell aufgefordert, EKT auf breiter Ebene für Kinder und Jugendliche aller Altersgruppen zugänglich zu machen. Diese Kampagne hat es auf die Wehrlosesten abgezielt und das mit wenig behördlicher Aufsicht.
One of the things that the marketing campaign does so brilliantly is to talk about electroshock as a treatment of last resort. That is what we call a lie. There are psychiatrists in the States who recommend electroshock for all sorts of things, including inscriptions like autism, ADHD, learning disability, and they recommend that is the first treatment that people are given, not the last, not the end of the line.
In den Vereinigten Staaten verlangen Bundesbestimmungen heute, dass alle Gerätehersteller Nebenwirkungen der EKT berichten. Aber die Gerätehersteller leisten nur selten Folge.
So you have manufacturers that know about adverse events. that have logs of adverse events that didn't report adverse events to the FDA. And the FDA has done very little to actually enforce those regulations.
Und wenn sie berichtet haben, hat das bis zu 17 Jahre gedauert. Und die Berichte, die erhalten wurden, sind oft grausam. Schlaganfälle, Katatonie, ein toter Fötus, der Kopf eines Mannes in Flammen. Und das sind nur einige Beispiele.
My husband Jose Topete had ECT. They told us what a great thing it was and how it was going to help our family and help Jose. Jose had 23 treatments of ECT, and during the ECT treatments, he did not get better at any time. In fact, he had a breakdown at one time after the first week of ECT. We didn't realize that his whole memory was gone until after ECT was over. And one of the just terrible times was we live in a rural area that has a pond, and we have lots of frogs and bullfrogs. Well, we heard the frogs making a lot of racket, and Jose said, "What's that noise?" And we said, "Oh, it's just the frogs." And he said, "What's a frog?" He doesn't know his parents. He doesn't know his siblings. He has no memory of our marriage, the birth of his children, taking care of his family, his job. He was a California state tax auditor. He had no memory of what California tax law was. Everything was wiped out of his mind. His children, me, he didn't know who we were. At first I thought, okay, we'll be able to just teach him who we are and make him love us again. And that didn't work like that. It's been a real heartbreak for all of us.
Trotz all des angerichteten Schadens wurde das EKT-Gerät nie wirklich reglementiert.
What we have here is a basic electronic device. It generates pulses for the purpose of delivering an electric shock. There's nothing medical about it, it's just a pulse generator.
Dieses EKT-Gerät wurde online gekauft. Keine Lizenz, keine Hintergrundprüfung. Es wurden keine Fragen gestellt. Einfach eine Kreditkarte.
In 1976, the United States Food and Drug Administration was given authority by Congress to regulate devices such as these. This device, of course, was never tested by the FDA because it's too old. This one was used starting in the 1940s. When the FDA gained control over these devices, they didn't start regulating ECT devices because they were already in use. Any device that was already being used did not need to be tested, as long as it's substantially equivalent to the devices that were used when the FDA took control.
The FDA allowed it to be grandfathered in, meaning it didn't require any proof of efficacy or clinical trials for safety and efficacy. They just let it stay on the market.
Nun behaupten Psychiater zwei Dinge. Auf einer Seite behaupten sie, dass Elektroschockgeräte im Wesentlichen gleichwertig waren als jene aus den 40ern. Gleichzeitig vermarkteten sie die EKT als modern und neu und verbessert. Eine durchschaubare Täuschung. Aber 1979 wurde das EKT-Gerät von der FDA als Klasse-3-Gerät klassifiziert, was heißt, es ist ziemlich gefährlich und muss auf Sicherheit geprüft werden. Die FDA gab den Herstellern 3 Jahre, um zu beweisen, dass es sicher ist.
So, if ECT wants to claim safety and effectiveness, they should be showing by clinical studies that it's safe and effective. They haven't. And it isn't because they can't afford to. There's plenty of their own consultants that work for big league universities that get plenty of funding to do it. They choose not to because ECT is not effective.
Has Somatics ever conducted any studies to determine whether any brain injury could be caused by ECT?
Somatics has never conducted any studies of any kind. We're not in the business of doing studies of traumatic brain injury. We sell Thymotrons.
Jegliche Möglichkeit zu vermeiden, getestet zu werden, haben Psychiater sich bei der FDA dafür eingesetzt, die Geräte in Klasse 2 neu einzustufen. Eine Kategorie, die auch solche Dinge wie Spritzen, Kontaktlinsen und Kondome beinhaltet.
There's nothing else in Class 2 that causes brain damage, cardiac standstill, stroke, brain hemorrhage, seizures. It's really ridiculous for them to even be considered as Class 2. The reason they want to put the ECT machine in Class 2 is because it wouldn't have to be tested for safety or effectiveness.
Aufgrund des öffentlichen Protests legte die FDA eine Anhörung fest, um die Gültigkeit der Neueinstufung zu bestimmen. EKT-Überlebende flogen nach Washington, um als Zeugen auszusagen.
I argued with a psychiatrist and dumped me in the locked ward and shocked me 5 times. I became violent. I tore my nails off, dragged them under the door. And he said after 5 times, sometimes they don't help you.
I had over 80 shock treatments. And yes, they called them maintenance treatments, but I don't remember my wedding day. I don't remember my husband putting a ring on my finger.
When I was given an IQ test a few months after the ECT and asked the population of the United States, I answered 1,000. When he asked me to guess again, I answered 2,000. I remember having no idea where to find the answer in my head.
Das Beratungsgremium stimmte weitgehend überein, dass die EKT-Geräte in Klasse 3 bleiben und Sicherheitsprüfungen unterzogen werden sollten. Aber die FDA, vertreten durch Jeffrey Shuren und seine Kollegin Malvina Edelmann, ignorierte die Empfehlungen des Gremiums und erweiterte die Verwendung des EKT-Geräts als ein Klasse-2-Gerät.
3,000 submissions were sent into the Food and Drug Administration talking about the destructiveness of electroshock. The FDA and the APA and other psychiatrists want to make ECT more broadly available, despite the fact that all these people are saying no, despite tens of thousands of people saying the electroshock is damaging, that it can actually kill you, that it destroys their life.
I recently started ECT treatments, electroconvulsive therapy. I was supposed to have one today, but I went ahead and canceled it. Because I'm stupid now. Or I'm definitely not as smart as they used to be. I spent a lot of time and money on education because I wanted to be smart. And I was smart. I don't remember anything anymore. Right now, this is my life. If it's not on this sheet, I'm not remembering. When it came to ECT, it was out of sheer desperation. And I didn't research it. And I just trusted. And now that I'm where I am, I don't have the brain capacity to research it. It's too late.
Psychiater und Hersteller von EKT-Geräten sind sich dem Schaden sehr bewusst, den sie anstellen. Warum machen sie es also weiterhin?
We look at the cost of manufacturing one of these machines. It has 3 of these transformers. They might be $40 a piece. And these parts probably could be collected for a total of about $50 or $60 for the components. The printed circuit board could probably be manufactured for less than $100 in quantity. All of these resistors are pennies a piece, and the integrated circuits are normally less than $1 a piece. So we see here a device that could be manufactured in quantity for between $500 and $1,000, including parts and labor.
Und mit EKT-Systemen, die für fast $20.000 verkauft werden, ist der Preisaufschlag riesig. Zusätzlich profitieren Psychiater ansehnlich von der Verschreibung der EKT, da sie für alle Elektroschock-Sitzungen anwesend sein und daher bezahlt werden müssen.
It costs about $2,500 per session. So if you do the math, and let's just say for simple mathematics, the person has 10 sessions initially, that's $25,000.
Die Kosten für stationäre Patienten sind sogar noch profitabler. Hier verdienen sie bis zu $120.000 pro Patient.
We would start usually around 6 a.m. We would see up to 13 patients a day. It was almost like an assembly line mentality, kind of get them in, get them worked up, get the treatment, and get them out, and get the next one in, get the treatment, do the recovery, get them out. It was a very lucrative business. Big money maker.
Psychiater, die Elektroschocks durchführen, streichen durchschnittlich doppelt so viel ein wie jene, die es nicht tun. Und sie können diese Einnahmen in nur ein paar Stunden pro Woche machen.
It's been calculated that in America, psychiatrists doing a relatively small amount of electroshock, possibly 20 sessions a week, will earn anything up to an additional $300,000 per year.
Und mit 100.000 Amerikanern, die jedes Jahr EKT erhalten, haben EKT-Psychiater allein in den USA ein $5,4 Milliarden Schockimperium geschaffen. Das ist mehr Geld als das nationale Budget der Hälfte der Länder der Erde.
It has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with helping the patients. It's just a money machine.
Da hier so viel Geld gemacht werden kann, ist die Schockindustrie voll von Interessenkonflikten. Das Gesicht dieser Konflikte, Psychologe und eifriger Befürworter der EKT, Harold Sackham.
Has any manufacturer of ECT devices ever given you money?
I've received reimbursements in honoraria.
How much money have you received?
$10,000, maybe $15,000, $20,000, $20,000, $25,000, $70,000.
Zusätzlich hat Sackham mindestens $9 Millionen an Regierungsgeldern erhalten, um Elektroschock zu erforschen. Hier handelt es sich um einen Interessenkonflikt, der zurück zum US National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH, führt, dessen Direktor für EKT-Forschung, Psychiater Matthew Rudoffer, die Fördergelder überwacht. Rudoffer hat Harold Sackhams Anstalten nicht nur für Jahre mit Geld überhäuft. Das Duo schrieb gemeinsam auch ein Kapitel eines EKT-Lehrbuchs. Sarah Lisenby ist auch bei NIMH. Sie hatte finanzielle Beziehungen zu 10 verschiedenen psychiatrischen Geräteherstellern. Ihr Mentor war Harold Sackham. Dann gibt es Richard Weiner von der amerikanischen Psychiatrievereinigung. Weiner war der leitende Psychiater der APA-Arbeitsgruppe, die empfahl, Gehirnschäden von APAs EKT-Einwilligungsformular mit folgenden Worten zu streichen. Gehirnschäden müssen nicht als potenzielles Risiko mit einbezogen werden. Weiner war auch ein Berater für die beiden größten amerikanischen EKT-Gerätehersteller, Nectar und Somatics. Somatics ist im Besitz der Schockpsychiater Richard Abrams und Conrad Swartz, die für ein EKT-System bis zu $20.000 verlangen. Richard Weiners EKT-Bericht der APA-Arbeitsgruppe zitierte über 60 Artikel von Abrams. Und alle Hauptakteure in diesem verschlungenen Netz der Korruption sind redaktionelle Vorstandsmitglieder von The Journal of ECT. Abrams, Swartz, Lisenby, Weiner, Sackham, Rudolfer, Kellner und Fink.
When you invite the foxes to watch the hen house and act like you're really guarding the place, well, it's really just a violation of public trust.
Und die Leben von Menschen werden zerstört.
I had problems before I had shock treatments, and I would say I have more problems now.
I didn't receive any help from the ECT that the psychiatrist gave me. It destroys you.
Shock treatment felt like torture to me. I say it's like torture. It felt like it destroyed my spirit.
It beat all the abuse I even experienced. It beat the rapings, the molestations. It beat everything because it did so much to me psychologically and physically.
Prior to ECT, I never thought about suicide. After the second round of ECT, I definitely was considering it.
ECT stands for electroconvulsive torture. Because obviously, it didn't help my sister at all.
Psychiatry destroyed my father because it destroyed his purpose, and he committed suicide in the end.
Is it the responsibility of the psychiatrist performing ECT to make sure that no harm comes to his patient?
The answer to that is no.
In der letzten Stunde haben Psychiater über 1000 Schocks durchgeführt. Ihre Opfer belaufen sich jedes Jahr auf 1 Million Menschen weltweit. Und da Schockärzte hart daran arbeiten, Einschränkungen für die EKT zu beseitigen, ist niemand sicher.
It's unconscionable, some of the things that I've seen, particularly as it pertains to very small children.
The way they've treated people is just unbelievable. I couldn't see treating my worst enemy that way.
Oh my God, I don't want that to happen to anybody. It brings tears to my eyes. It's frightening.
Just common sense will tell you that you don't need to put that electricity to their brain. I'm adamantly opposed.
Es gibt nur eine einzige Lösung für die EKT. Eine Behandlungsmethode, die nichts Geringeres als Hinrichtung durch Elektrizität ist.
It's a complete travesty as a civilized society to do these type of torturous, barbaric procedures.
ECT has to be stopped. We cannot continue to do this to people. We have safe and effective treatments that are out there. We do not need ECT.
It's just cruel and inhumane to be able to send people through that type of torture.
We're standing up and saying that this experimental dosing with ECT cannot occur anymore.
It's just assault and battery.
It's more torture than it is a medical treatment.
It should be illegal.
ECT should be banned.
ECT should have been banned 50 years ago. The sooner the better.
Es kann getan werden. Elektroschock wurde in mehreren Staaten und Ländern auf der ganzen Welt bereits vollständig oder teilweise verboten.
We got rid of the lobotomy because it was such an abhorrent image and it was so obviously a form of torture and assault. Electroshock is equally a form of torture and assault. We just haven't gotten rid of it yet. And we need to take action and require the FDA to ban this device, which has never been proven safe or effective.
This is an atrocity that should never have got as far as it has. It's just a mass experimentation, and the FDA does nothing. They need to be held accountable.
Elektroschock muss als Folter und eine barbarische Menschenrechtsverletzung bloßgestellt werden. Unsere Zukunft hängt davon ab. Schließen Sie sich der Citizens Commission on Human Rights an, um Elektroschock als das anzuprangern, was es ist. Ein Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit. Falls Sie oder jemand, den Sie kennen, durch Elektroschockbehandlung geschädigt wurde oder wenn Sie etwas dagegen tun wollen, ergreifen Sie Maßnahmen und erheben Sie Ihre Stimme. Kontaktieren Sie die CCHR.